I never imagined that our anniversary would end like this. I still remember the sharp pang in my chest when Ethan laughed at me. Jessica's boyfriend got her a Tiffany watch, and you bring me this, he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. Then, without a second thought, he tossed the watch I had carefully chosen into the trash as if it were worthless. I froze for a moment, my hands slightly trembling, my heart racing. And yet, I managed to say calmly, "Okay." I bent down, retrieved it, and ended the night quietly. No shouting, no dramatics, just a hollow clarity settling over me. A few days later, I got a call from Helen, the woman running the estate sale where I had found that watch. She asked if I was happy with it. I hesitated. Maybe I wasn't, because the rejection wasn't about the watch. It was about Ethan, about how he measured value, about the invisible lens through which he judged me and my love. I'm 29, working as an operations manager for a logistics company here in Denver. I've never been flashy. My grandmother raised me to value subtle beauty, history, and craftsmanship. That's why I had chosen that vintage 1920s watch for Ethan. It wasn't expensive for show. It had meaning, history, and soul. We had been together for 18 months, and I wanted to give him something that mattered. Dinner at his favorite restaurant, a quiet evening at my place with candles, the watch waiting in a vintage box I had carefully picked out. I imagined him opening it, a soft smile spreading across his face, touched by the thought behind it. Instead, he saw cheap junk. His words, "I deserve better than this," echoed in my mind. Not as an insult, but as a mirror reflecting the truth. He didn't see the thought, the care, the effort. I saw now that he only saw comparison, standards drawn from other people, other gifts, other boyfriends. Something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry, not yet. I felt clarity. If the watch was misread, what else about me had he misread? I realized that night that our differences weren't superficial, they were fundamental. And I didn't yet know how far this realization would stretch, how it would unravel our relationship over the next 6 months, forcing me to confront not just Ethan, but the way I valued myself and my love. I held that watch in my hands, my pulse racing, staring at the trash can, and thought, this isn't just a watch. This is a revelation, and I don't know if I can unsee it. I'm 29 now, but when I first met Ethan, I was 27, full of optimism, ambition, and a quiet belief that love could be meaningful if both people truly cared. I grew up in a small Denver apartment with my grandmother, who taught me to value subtle beauty and craftsmanship. To her, a well-made object had soul, a story, a history, and she instilled in me the same appreciation for depth over flash. Ethan was 28, working in tech, charming in a calm, confident way that drew people to him effortlessly. We met at a small art auction downtown. I was admiring a collection of early 20th century watches, and he approached, asking about the same piece I was looking at. There was an immediate spark, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but a quiet curiosity that made me want to know him better. Our first months together were a blend of simple joys, walks through historic neighborhoods, coffee shop afternoons where we discussed books, art, and dreams, quiet dinners at my apartment. Ethan had this way of noticing little details, how my eyes lit up talking about something I loved, the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous, and it made me feel seen. But love has a way of blindfolding you to subtler truths. I started noticing small signs, moments when he compared me to others, subtle comments about friends' relationships, even fleeting looks at other women. I brushed them off, thinking it was my insecurities, or that I was overanalyzing. I wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that love would smooth over these minor cracks. Family interactions added another layer of tension. Ethan's parents, well-to-do and accustomed to a certain social standard, often questioned me quietly. My career, my modest apartment, my clothes. I tried to be graceful, always polite, but a knot of anxiety lingered in my stomach every time I visited. I wanted their approval, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted Ethan to see me as someone worthy in every sense. Despite it all, I loved him deeply. I imagined our future together, anniversaries, holidays, perhaps even marriage. I paid attention to his tastes, his small preferences, what made him smile, what excited him. I wanted every gift, every gesture to resonate with meaning, not just impress him with its cost. When I found that vintage 1920s watch at the estate sale, I felt an instant connection. The watch was exquisite, a gleaming gold face, intricate metalwork, a story attached to it about a jazz musician giving it as a gift in Prohibition-era Chicago. It had character, history, soul. It wasn't about how much money I spent. It was about how deeply I understood Ethan. I pictured him opening the box, feeling the thoughtfulness, and I felt a thrill at the idea of seeing his reaction. Buying the watch felt like more than just a purchase. It was a declaration of love. It said, "I see you, I understand you, I cherish you," and in that moment, I believed that our connection was strong enough to weather any misunderstanding. Little did I know, our differences were far deeper than taste or style. They were about values, about what each of us measured as important. That watch, the care, the story, the meaning, was a mirror of my heart. And I would soon learn that Ethan was measuring not my thoughtfulness, but its perceived value, its comparison to others, its price tag in his mind. Looking back now, those early months were full of lessons I hadn't yet understood, about love, about compatibility, and about recognizing the signs of fundamental differences before they become heartbreakingly clear. It started small, almost imperceptible. Ethan began leaving his phone unlocked on the counter more often, brushing off messages with a shrug, yet there was a subtle tension in the way he glanced at it. Friends would mention things in passing, an event he'd forgotten to tell me about, an outing he suddenly needed to attend. And then there were his parents. Their subtle critiques never stopped. The apartment, my wardrobe, the way I spent money. They never said it outright, but I felt their judgment as a quiet pressure on my chest every time we were together. At first, I tried to ignore it. Love, I told myself, is about trust, and I trusted him. I believed that these small, nagging signs were just life's minor irritations, not warnings. Yet the weight of subtle criticisms and unexplained behaviors began to build. There were moments that lingered in my mind, hauntingly mundane yet telling. The quick glance at another woman across a cafe, the soft smile when a coworker complimented him, the way he sometimes seemed distracted, even while we were talking. I told myself I was imagining things, that perhaps I was being overly sensitive. But deep down, a quiet seed of doubt had been planted. The tension escalated when I noticed how he reacted to gifts and gestures, something I would give with care and thoughtfulness, like a book I knew he had wanted, or a small handmade item from a local artisan, was often met with polite indifference. I remember one birthday dinner where I had gone out of my way to find a vintage watch strap that complemented a timepiece he loved. He looked at it, smiled briefly, and then immediately shifted the conversation to someone else's extravagant gift. The comparison stung more than the words. I started replaying old memories, trying to spot signs I had missed. I remembered the anniversary of our first date when he seemed distracted despite my careful planning. I recalled the holidays when he subtly compared my efforts to the grand gestures of friends' partners. And I realized something uncomfortable. He measured value differently than I did. Not by thoughtfulness, not by meaning, but by status, recognition, and comparison. These thoughts gnawed at me quietly. I found myself second-guessing my choices, analyzing his expressions, even counting the number of times he praised someone else for an effort I had tried to emulate. It was exhausting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something essential in our relationship was off balance. And then came the moments with his parents that made it tangible. They never outright criticized me to my face, but their expectations were clear in the way they looked at my modest apartment, the subtle eye rolls at my clothing, the casual comments on how Ethan deserves someone who fits in better. I felt cornered, small, constantly aware that my worth in their eyes, and perhaps in Ethan's, was measured by a standard I could never meet. Yet I loved him. I truly did. And love makes you rationalize, make excuses, and hope. Hope that these small cracks could be smoothed over, that he would see the thought and care behind my actions, that he would value meaning over comparison. But the seed of conflict had already taken root. It was quiet at first, almost invisible, like a thread weaving through our conversations and actions. And little did I know, it was growing into a chasm that would soon reveal not just Ethan's values, but mine as well. It happened on our anniversary night, The night I had planned every detail with care, the night I hoped would be a testament to our love. I had imagined Ethan's reaction to the vintage 1920s watch, its gleaming face, intricate craftsmanship, and the story that came with it, a gift given decades ago by a jazz musician meant to capture history and emotion. Dinner had gone well. He laughed at the jokes, commented on the flavors of the dishes, seemed present. My heart swelled with relief. Maybe this evening would heal the subtle tensions that had been creeping into our relationship. Back at my apartment, I handed him the watch in its vintage box, my hands slightly trembling, my pulse quickening. "Happy anniversary, Ethan. I hope you love it as much as I loved finding it for you," I said, my voice soft but steady. He looked at it, and something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of confusion, then something colder. "What is this?" he asked, his tone tight, almost mocking. I smiled nervously. "It's a vintage watch from the 1920s. Look at the craftsmanship, the history. It even comes with documentation." He shook his head, his lips pressing into a thin line. "This looks like something you'd find at a thrift store. Cheap junk." The words struck me like a punch to the stomach. My heart skipped a beat, a rush of heat rising to my cheeks. My hands trembled slightly as I tried to explain. "Ethan, look at the certification. This is authentic. It has provenance, the story behind it." He cut me off sharply. "I don't wear cheap junk. Jessica's boyfriend got her a Tiffany watch, and you give me this?" He gestured at the box, tossing it toward the trash can. Not placed carefully, not handed back, thrown like garbage. Time seemed to slow. My chest tightened, my throat burned, and I felt the first sting of tears I refused to let fall. Something inside me shifted, not anger exactly, but a piercing clarity. This isn't about the watch. This is about how he sees me. I bent down calmly, retrieving the watch from the trash. "Okay," I said, my voice low, controlled, not apologetic, not defensive, just acknowledgement. He looked surprised, as if he had expected outrage, begging, explanation. "I think you should go," I added, placing the watch gently on the counter. He blinked, confusion mixing with frustration. "I'm not being dramatic. I deserve better than this." And that was it. That single sentence crystallized months of small doubts, critiques, and subtle comparisons. I realized that the core of our relationship, the way we measured love, value, and respect, was fundamentally misaligned. The rest of the night passed in a strange haze. He left, and I sat on the couch, my hand still gripping the vintage box. The watch wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the embodiment of care, thoughtfulness, and understanding. And yet to him, it was worthless. That night, the world felt different. I understood, with a sharp, painful certainty, that the relationship I had nurtured for 18 months was built on values that didn't align with mine, and that clarity, while sobering, was the first step toward seeing the truth. I sat on my couch long after Ethan had left, the watch still in my hands. My pulse was erratic, my chest tight, as if the air itself had thickened around me. I kept turning the watch over, examining the delicate metalwork, the tiny, gleaming face, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How could he see something so meaningful as cheap junk? My mind replayed every detail, every conversation, every subtle critique I had brushed off over the past months. All of a sudden, the picture was clearer. It wasn't about thrift stores or vintage value. It was about perception, comparison, and his inability to recognize care that didn't come with a brand name. I questioned myself relentlessly. Had I misread him all along? Was I imagining things, projecting meaning onto gestures he never truly valued? The knot of self-doubt tightened. My love for him, the trust, the hope, the effort, suddenly felt fragile, almost foolish. And yet there was something else, a spark of strength, quiet but insistent. I realized that my worth, my effort, and my understanding weren't dependent on his recognition. I had given from a place of love and care, not for validation. That thought steadied me, even as the sting of rejection lingered. The next day I called him. I needed clarity, a confrontation, not out of anger, but to understand the man I had loved and to confront the reality that had shattered the illusion of our compatibility. "Ethan, can we talk?" My voice was calm, even though my hands shook slightly as I held the phone. "I don't think we need to," he replied tersely, the same edge of disbelief in his tone from the night before. "Yes, we do," I insisted. "I need to understand what just happened." When he arrived, I motioned for him to sit. The room was quiet, the tension almost tangible. I held the watch on my lap, feeling the weight of not just the object, but the meaning it carried. "Do you understand why I'm upset?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. My eyes met his, searching for honesty. "I don't know," he admitted reluctantly. I don't get why this means so much to you. It's just a watch." "Just a watch?" The words caught in my throat, my heartbeat accelerating. "This isn't just a watch, Ethan. It represents thoughtfulness, history, care, everything I tried to give you, everything I thought we shared, and you tossed it like it was nothing." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I guess I just didn't see it that way. I felt a mixture of hurt and clarity wash over me. The man I had loved, the one I had trusted, measured value in a way that was fundamentally incompatible with mine. And while I felt the sting of rejection, I also felt a strange empowerment, the recognition that I could see him clearly now. "I think we need to be honest about who we are, Ethan," I said, my voice gaining strength. "Not about watches, not about money, not about gifts, about what we value, how we show love, and whether we see each other truly. I see now that we might want different things from this relationship." His silence was telling. The room felt heavy, yet I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time, I confronted not just his inability to appreciate what I offered, but the truth of our misalignment, and, more importantly, the realization that I didn't need his validation to know my worth. That night, I went to bed with the watch beside me, not in anger, but in quiet reflection. The pain of his misunderstanding and my disillusionment mingled with the beginning of self-recognition. I realized that the first step toward healing was acknowledging that love alone isn't always enough, and that sometimes clarity comes through heartbreak. The days that followed were heavier than I could have imagined. Ethan's parents began subtly inserting themselves into our private life, offering thinly veiled criticisms that pierced more deeply than words alone. "Are you sure you know what a man like Ethan needs?" his mother asked casually over brunch one Sunday. "You don't want to disappoint him, right?" The words were coated with sugar, but their sting lingered like an invisible pressure around my shoulders. Ethan seemed caught in the middle, apologetic yet distant. His father chimed in occasionally, praising other women in his social circle for their elegance or taste, leaving me feeling inadequate and scrutinized. Every comment, every comparison, every side glance carried a judgment I couldn't escape. I found myself walking on eggshells, constantly adjusting, measuring my every action. The watch incident became the unspoken centerpiece of every family conversation. I noticed how quickly they would redirect compliments toward women with visible status symbols, then glance at me, expectant, as if measuring my response. And Ethan. He seemed frustrated by my insistence on holding to my values, subtly rolling his eyes at my stubbornness. Meanwhile, my friends noticed the shift in my demeanor. "You've changed," one said gently. "You're more tense, more guarded. Is everything okay?" I smiled politely, brushing it off, but inside I was unraveling. Doubts gnawed at me. Had I misread the signs all along? Was I too naive, too idealistic, too invested in gestures that didn't matter to him? I began noticing other inconsistencies. Missed calls, half-truths, the way he would sometimes disappear for hours with vague explanations. And every time I tried to ask, his irritation surfaced like a storm ready to break. "You don't trust me," he said one evening, his voice low but sharp. "I can't keep explaining myself to you all the time." The culmination came during a dinner at his parents' house. What started as polite conversation spiraled into subtle digs. Comments about my taste and how Ethan deserves someone who understands the finer things in life were thrown casually, yet each word landed like a stone in my chest. I felt small, scrutinized, and increasingly invisible. Not for who I was, but for the differences in how we saw value. And then, a friend of Ethan's dropped a casual remark. "You know, the watch thing. People are talking about it. Some think it's cute, some think it's ridiculous." The casual tone belied the weight of it. Suddenly, my personal gift, the thing I had chosen with care, was being discussed as a judgment on me. Inside, a quiet shift occurred. The pain of feeling misunderstood merged with clarity. This wasn't just about a gift, or even about family approval. It was about respect, recognition, and whether Ethan truly valued the depth behind the gestures I made. And I realized that the constant comparisons, the subtle undermining, the inability to see meaning, these weren't small cracks anymore. They were chasms. That night, I stood before the mirror, staring at my own reflection. The woman looking back at me was tired, yes, but also quietly resolute. I understood something important. I could no longer let external pressures, judgments, or misaligned values dictate my self-worth. I had to reclaim it. And as the days passed, evidence of Ethan's inconsistencies continued to pile up, texts he tried to hide, stories that didn't add up, and the same pattern of placing external approval above the bond we shared. Every confrontation seemed to escalate the tension. Every comment from his family added weight, and every casual remark from friends confirmed that what I had felt all along was true. Our values, our definitions of care, and our expectations from love were no longer aligned. By the end of that week, the air between us was thick with unspoken resentment, unacknowledged disappointment, and a realization that some truths, once revealed, could not be ignored. I felt myself changing, not in anger, but in understanding. I was no longer just reacting. I was observing, learning, and preparing to act with clarity and purpose. The following weeks felt like I was moving underwater. Every interaction with Ethan, every glance from his family, every casual remark from friends weighed like stones pressing against my chest. I started questioning myself constantly. Was I too sensitive? Too idealistic? Too demanding? My reflection in the mirror seemed almost unrecognizable. The woman staring back was tense, exhausted, and hollow-eyed, carrying the weight of disappointment, betrayal, and disillusionment. I replayed the watch incident over and over in my mind, not the object itself, but what it represented, my care, thoughtfulness, and effort, all disregarded. He had thrown it away as if it were meaningless, as if my gesture, my intention, and the very thought of celebrating us were trivial. The more I thought about it, the more my chest tightened, my hands trembled, and the lump in my throat refused to go away. I felt isolated. Even Ethan, the man I thought I knew, seemed unreachable. He was physically present sometimes, yet emotionally distant, dismissive, or distracted. Conversations that should have been intimate turned into negotiations, arguments, or silences heavy with judgment. I felt invisible in the most profound way, not just unseen, but misunderstood, unvalued, and ultimately alone. One night, I curled up on the couch, holding the watch tightly in my hands. My fingers traced the delicate engraving, the smooth metal, the tiny dial. I thought about Helen, the woman who had entrusted me with this piece of history, and how carefully she had explained its story. And yet here it was, its beauty unappreciated, its meaning lost. Tears came, unbidden, but they felt less like release and more like acknowledgement of how far I had fallen. I realized that I had invested not just money or effort, but trust, emotion, and hope into a relationship that no longer reflected who I was or who I wanted to be. Every memory of laughter, whispered confidences, and shared plans was now tinged with the realization that those moments had been overshadowed by misalignment, misunderstanding, and misplaced priorities. The isolation extended beyond Ethan. Even my friends began to notice my withdrawal, the way I no longer laughed as freely, no longer shared my thoughts with the same openness. I started avoiding calls, canceling plans, and retreating further into myself. I was physically present at work, going through motions, but emotionally, I felt trapped in a fog of despair and self-doubt. And yet, amidst this darkness, a small, fragile spark persisted. The awareness that I could see the truth now, that the illusions had been stripped away. It was painful, but it was clarity. I was at rock bottom, but even in that place, I knew that the lowest point often precedes transformation. I spent that night staring at the watch, at its history, its craftsmanship, its significance, and I whispered to myself, I gave all of me, and that's never worthless. Maybe he can't see it, maybe no one around us can, but I know, and one day I'll find someone who does too. It was a sobering, lonely realization, but it was also the seed of strength, the understanding that the depth of love, thoughtfulness, and commitment I carried was mine to honor, not dependent on someone else's recognition, and that even in despair was a beginning. A few days after hitting that dark low, something shifted. I was organizing my apartment, papers, letters, receipts, trying to reclaim some order in my own life, when I noticed something odd. A small stack of Ethan's mail had been carelessly left on the counter. Among them, a credit card statement caught my eye, and my heart sank. At first, I hesitated. Curiosity and fear wrestled inside me, but the moment I opened it, my pulse quickened, not in panic, but in the sharp clarity of understanding. There it was. Charges at upscale jewelry stores, at restaurants I had never been to, small gifts for someone else. The pattern was undeniable. The truth I had feared was finally tangible, documented, undeniable. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and finally, clarity. The confusion and doubt that had clouded my judgment evaporated, replaced by a steady recognition. Ethan had not only dismissed my care, he had been prioritizing someone else's validation over our relationship. The watch incident was never about my misjudgment. It was a symptom of the truth I had been blind to. That afternoon, I called my closest friend, Sophia, someone who had always been my anchor. I needed perspective, a neutral voice. "Sophia, I think I finally understand everything," I said, my voice trembling but controlled. "It's not me, it's him, and I won't let this continue." She didn't need to say anything. Her silence confirmed what I already knew. I had been giving all of me to someone incapable of reciprocating, someone who measured love in appearances and material validation rather than thoughtfulness and depth. That night, I confronted him directly. I didn't yell, I didn't plead. I presented the evidence calmly, watching as his face shifted through surprise, defensiveness, and finally, an uncomfortable resignation. "I've known for a while," I said, my voice firm, steady. "The watch, the dismissals, the hidden spending, it all makes sense now. I see who you are, Ethan. I see how you value things, how you value people, and it's not aligned with me. I can't keep giving myself to someone who won't recognize it." He tried to argue, to justify, to plead, but I had already crossed the threshold. The clarity that had been painfully cultivated over weeks and months left no room for negotiation. I was no longer the woman willing to compromise her self-worth for the illusion of love. "I care about you," he said, a small tremor in his voice. I didn't realize." "I don't need your realization," I interrupted gently but firmly. "I need my life back. I need to be with someone whose values align with mine, who sees me, not just what I can provide or how I compare to someone else." I packed the watch, not as a gesture of anger, but as a symbol of reclaiming my power, my perspective, my life. It was mine, and I would honor it, not him. That night, I went to bed for the first time in weeks without that heavy weight pressing on my chest. There was grief, yes, but it was tempered by a sense of control, agency, and self-respect. For the first time, I felt the empowering truth. I was not defined by his perception, his judgment, or his ability to value me. My worth had always been inherent, and now I was reclaiming it with every fiber of my being. The days after my confrontation were surprisingly quiet. Ethan didn't call, didn't try to explain further, didn't attempt to argue. The absence of his presence was almost deafening, but in that silence, I felt a growing sense of liberation. Word spread quickly through his circle, almost like a ripple in still water. Friends who had once flattered him with their admiration now looked at him with curiosity, some with subtle judgment. The family, who had constantly scrutinized me, began to shift their stance too. His mother's tone changed when we crossed paths, less condescending, more cautious, as if the invisible armor of their assumptions had cracked. Ethan's credibility suffered in ways I hadn't expected. Casual acquaintances learned fragments of the story, and gossip, though unpleasant, carried an unspoken truth. The person who dismissed thoughtfulness, who valued appearances over sincerity, was finally facing the consequences. His carefully curated image began to falter, his authority in social settings subtly undermined by the clarity of my departure. I, on the other hand, felt a strange peace. The weight of compromise, doubt, and misalignment was lifted. I returned the watch to Helen, the woman who had sold it to me, explaining the story briefly, and she nodded with understanding. "Not everyone sees the beauty you do," she said. I smiled, feeling a small, serene victory, not of material possession, but of recognition, integrity, and self-respect. Walking away from Ethan and the life we had tried to build together was not a dramatic exit. No doors slammed, no shouting, no vindictive acts. I simply packed what was mine, collected my emotional clarity, and stepped into a life that felt, for the first time in months, entirely my own. The emptiness I initially feared was replaced with quiet possibilities. I could think, breathe, and create space for myself without judgment, without comparison, without the constant pressure of needing to be validated by someone incapable of understanding me. Every step away from him was a reclamation of autonomy, a statement that my worth was intrinsic, not conditional. I saw him only once more, weeks later, in a neutral setting. He tried to make conversation, half apologetic, half confused, but I recognized the futility of engaging. I smiled politely, offered a calm, brief acknowledgement, and continued on my path. No bitterness lingered, just a quiet certainty that the chapter had ended. In the end, the fallout wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving him wrong or showing anyone else what I had endured. The fallout was the natural consequence of choices, values, and integrity. He experienced the erosion of the facade he had built, while I experienced the liberation of authenticity. The balance had been restored, not by confrontation, but by clarity, honesty, and courage. By the time the dust settled, the watch was no longer a symbol of disappointment or rejection. It was a testament to discernment, to the courage to stand by one's values, and to the clarity that comes from seeing people and relationships for what they truly are. I left not as someone defeated, but as someone reborn, quietly, steadily, powerfully reclaiming her life. Months passed, and with each day, the weight of the past grew lighter. I rediscovered small joys I had neglected, morning walks in quiet neighborhoods, sketching in my journal, cooking new recipes, and savoring conversations with friends who truly listened. The clarity I had gained during the fallout became a compass guiding my choices, my attention, and my heart. The watch, once a symbol of disappointment and misunderstanding, now sat in my drawer not as a relic of conflict, but as a reminder. A reminder that thoughtfulness, sincerity, and care are priceless. That the value of a gift, or a gesture, lies not in its cost, but in the meaning behind it and in the heart of the giver. I learned that people reveal themselves not just through words, but through how they respond to care, how they perceive intention, and how they prioritize connection versus appearance. Ethan's reaction had taught me something painful yet invaluable. That compatibility is not about shared interests alone, or even about affection. It's about aligned values, mutual respect, and the ability to recognize each other's worth without needing a price tag. I began to approach relationships differently. I noticed subtleties in gestures, listened to intentions, and valued depth over spectacle. I recognized that love is not a transaction, nor is it a contest of who can spend more or impress more. True connection thrives in understanding, empathy, and authenticity, qualities I now held as non-negotiable. Occasionally, memories of Ethan and the watch would surface, but they no longer triggered anger or regret. They were lessons etched into my experience. They reminded me to trust my instincts, honor my boundaries, and never compromise the respect I have for myself in exchange for fleeting approval. And so, I moved forward. Life was not perfect, but it was honest, and that honesty felt liberating. I met new people, explored new interests, and nurtured the relationships that reflected reciprocity and authenticity. Each step was a quiet victory, a reaffirmation that my self-worth was not contingent upon recognition from someone else. If there's a lesson I can share with anyone watching this story, it's this: know your value, and don't let anyone, no matter how charming, persuasive, or familiar, define it for you. Thoughtfulness, integrity, and care are rare treasures. They deserve to be honored, not dismissed. And the right people will see them, cherish them, and respond in kind. As for me, I am whole. I am resilient. I am finally free to shape a life that reflects who I truly am, not who someone else wants me to be. The past remains a teacher, not a burden. The watch remains a symbol, not of what I lost, but of what I learned. That self-respect, clarity, and authenticity are the most precious gifts of all. And with that understanding, I stepped into the world, not looking back, but forward with strength, grace, and unwavering certainty.